Hi, everybody. My name is Lily, and I'm so happy to be moderating this panel celebrating Latinx authors in fantasy. We have such a great treat for you. Not only are we chatting about books that have already released, we're also talking about some books that you can pre order and that have not released yet. I think this is the furthest out panel I've ever done. So I'm especially excited for that and to chat with you all, give a sneak peek about what's going to come in the next couple of months. I am the moderator for the panel, and I'm kind of the face behind Utopia State of Mind. And we're going to have our lovely panelists introduce themselves, and then we will jump into the questions that I have. If you have any questions, then feel free to leave them in the chat, and I will get back to them at the end. Angela, do you want to start?
Yeah, thanks for having us. This is really, really fun. My name is Angela Montoya, and I am the author, you can kind of see it in the back, but of Sinner's Isle, which came out last year on Halloween. And I am the author also of A Cruel Thirst, which comes out in December 17th. And I'm just super excited to be here. I don't have any fun tidbits about myself. I have no hobbies. I just stay home. So yeah, so that's a little bit about me.
Hi, I am RM Romero, and I am the author of Death's Country, which came out in May, The Ghost of Rose Hill, The Dollmaker of Krakow, A Warning About Swans, and next month I have Tale of the Flying Forest coming out. I am a Jewish Latina who lives in Miami, although right now I am in Colorado visiting family, and I have a cat named Robin Goodfellow that I am a bit obsessed with.
Hi, everyone. So excited to be here too. My name is Vanessa Montalbán, and I write genre-bendy YA fantasy, usually with a touch of spooky horror. My debut, It's All Dark Trouble, came out last year in August. It's a Latinx twist on practical magic. And my new story, These Vengeful Wishes, oh, I'm so glad I put it here next to me, is this one. And it's a retelling of La Segua, which is a creature of the wood who lures cheating men and then unalives them. But here I am giving her a little bit more depth.
Perfect. The first question I want to ask about is fantasy related because that's one of the themes of our panel. And I want to know if you could all talk to us about your introduction into fantasy, and if you can recall a memory where you felt seen in a book, or if it hasn't happened yet, I just want to know about your foray, I guess, into fantasy.
Yeah, I feel like for me, I've always just lived in a fantasy world in my brain. Like it's always just wanted to go to, the extraordinary, just because why not? It's just more fun that way. As far as my favorites, even growing up, I feel like I was always into, and I don't know if this is even fantasy. This is more like horror, but Goosebumps and all of those sort of books. I was always just, I'm diving in. I want to be in this world as a bystander. I don't want to be haunted or anything like that. Anything listening, please don't. But I love listening and watching, being part of it. And this is also not in fantasy as well, but the first real book I really and truly saw myself in was Perfectly Parvin by Olivia Abtahi. The main character, she's a hairy girl, and she talks about that a lot. And I was like, thank you. Yes, I am seen. But yeah, but it's fantasy, I just love it so much. Just every show growing up, every book, if it's in a different world, I just want to be there.
I think my first foray into fantasy was The Chronicles of Narnia. My dad took me to see a high school production of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I became completely obsessed with this idea that Narnia was definitely in my closet. I checked every day until I was about 11 and finally realized that, if I'm going to get to Narnia, it's probably going to be an accident and it's probably not in my teeny tiny little closet. I think the first time I saw myself sort of like Angela was not in a strictly fantasy book. It was in more of a fantasy horror. I read it when I was 10, like many millennials. I got my introduction to Stephen King probably a little bit too young. But I was struck by how realistic the kids in that story were. They were outcasts. They had a very strong bond, and they actually behaved like 11-year-olds instead of the kind of perfect role models that I had previously gotten in fiction involving children. You know, they were kind of gross. They liked to impress each other with how many curse words they knew, but they were still kids who liked to play pretend.
Yeah, I was also a huge fan of Goosebumps. Like that was my intro into horror. And a lot of those spooky stories you read in the dark. It has like the scarecrow on the cover. Like there's a bunch of different ones, but those are so good. Are You Afraid of the Dark on Nickelodeon was like, and now I'm such a chicken. Like I can't watch that now. Like but I was also reading books that I probably shouldn't have been early on. It was very mystery thrillers, a lot of horror again. I was reading Lois Duncan books. I don't know if you've heard of her. She wrote Killing Mr. Griffin, I Know What You Did Last Summer. But she also had a ton of other books that had very like subtle magic woven in. And it was just mediums, psychics, visions. And I didn't really realize that I was reading fantasy because like those were already like such commonplace things in my real life, like aunts being like, I saw a vision, you're gonna die today, so be careful.
That's dark. That's dark.
But yeah, it's like that was my first intro into like that subtle, eerie magic that I really enjoy. I also saw myself in like the teen angst of Sarah Dessen contemporary novels. She always wrote about like the new girl, the lonely kid experience, and I really connected to that. And yeah, that was my intro into fantasy.
Yeah, I love listening to all of your responses because I definitely agree. I feel like I enjoy fantasy, but I don't necessarily there are like only a very small portion of books I think that I could actually live in or would want to live in, I guess is the better response to that. The majority of them I love reading, but I'm like, no, I can't. I don't want to be any closer than I am right now in this moment.
No, not at all. No. Yeah. We would not survive. 100% day one out. Yeah.
Definitely would die in Westeros.
Throwing yourself off the train like that.
Yeah, like maybe in the prologue, but that's it. Like that's as far as I'm getting in these books. I'm not making it to chapter 1.
No.
Well, because all of your books are in the fantasy genre, how do you approach world building? As you know, when you're talking about kind of creating the magical components of the book or creating the fantastical components. And since all of these books are not your first book, in the world building process, writing this particular book, did you learn anything new or learn anything different about kind of the world building process with this book?
I love that question. Yeah, for A Cruel Thirst, my approach was so different than my one for Sinner's Isle. For Sinner's Isle, I kind of pantsed my way through and built the world as I went. And because of that, I had a billion revisions. I mean, I edited that book at least a million times. But with A Cruel Thirst, I didn't have that time because it was under contract, now. So for world building, I really sunk in before I even started writing a word because I had to get approval about things. And so my approach for A Cruel Thirst in particular, I really wanted to understand the world that these characters were living in. And for me, I did a lot of just research. It's a secondary world that this book is based out of, but I did base it off of, what was Alta California in 1830, so part of the Mexican Empire. So I wanted to look into what did that look like for these vaqueros? What did these people in this part of my state now, right? But what did they eat? What did they do? How did they speak? All of those things. And then I also wanted to insert a different sort of lore because, again, this is coming from a different world. And so I pulled from like Mexica, Aztec lore and twisted it and kind of tweaked it into a new sort of thing. But yeah, this time around, I really wanted to build first. So then when it came to writing, it was much faster and I didn't have to do a million edits. That didn't happen. I still had to do a million edits, but at least this time I knew what I was doing. And so it was a little more streamlined adventure for sure.
So Angela was much smarter than me. I continue to be primarily a pantser, despite writing on spec. I threw out an idea about two Miami teens who descend into the underworld to rescue their girlfriend in an Orpheus and Eurydice retelling. And usually when I do world building, I draw a lot from mythology and folklore. That's always been a big obsession with mine. So in order to construct this underworld, I looked at all different kinds of underworld mythology, whether that was Aztec, Dante's Inferno, the Greek underworld, and then just sort of this idea I'd had since I was a teenager about, well, what if the afterlife just kind of looked like this world? You know, you still have the same sorts of concerns. You still have some people who just cling to their life rather than moving on to whatever is supposed to come after death. My construction of the underworld is this gray city where it's always raining behind these bone gates that are seen through the lens of whatever culture you're coming from. So you can see on the cover, these kids are from Miami, so they see it as a giant alligator because Floridians. So yeah, my approach to world building, like Angela, sometimes I have to go back and do a lot of straightening out of things like the world building and also the magic system. I feel like that's the most common edit that I get is, okay, but why does this magic work like that? I'm like, I don't, because it's magic. I don't want to explain it. I come from a tradition of magical realism where it's just magic is real. We all accept magic is real. How do I just nod to this and then move on?
Oh, that's so smart because like my characters are also from Miami, and I very much took that approach. When you build a world, you want the magic and the world to reflect the culture and what the character has grown up seeing. So like how they saw an alligator in the, in the thing. That's very interesting. I also take my both of my stories so far that have been published are based on the contemporary world, the real world. So I like taking mundane things that the character sees in their everyday life and adding like a unique, magical, eerie twist to it, like birds that follow you around, plants that close up when you near them, wells that are haunted, you know, things like that. I also had the very similar issue with my debut that I didn't outline or I outlined very loosely. And I'm talking about this is a dual timeline, 1980s and 2016 Miami, multiple point of view story. I don't know why I did this to myself, but it was just, the revisions were brutal. And so I learned my lesson this time around and I outlined meticulously. I really wanted the magic to have rules, you know, to give them certain limitations within my own like boundaries. And then I thought of how monsters are usually like metaphors for the character's worst fears. So I knew my character first, and I wanted to see how can this monster challenge them the most. So it was a lot of asking myself, why? And that's how I built off that world and built my antagonist. I don't like calling her a villain because La Segua is cool, but the antagonist.
I want to go back a little bit and just ask what the inspiration is, right, behind the most recent or upcoming release. Just, I guess, go a little bit back and talk a little bit more about kind of what started this specific idea.
Well, let me go back. It's been a little bit now. It's interesting because when I sold Sinner's Isle, it was sold in a 2-book deal. And so it was Sinner's Isle and then whatever idea we had next. But I always was hoping it was going to be either a sequel or a prequel to Sinner's Isle. So I was trying to force that. And they're like, hold on, wait a second. No, this is for something else. And so I started just pitching different ideas. and several, and we kind of landed on vampires. My publishers were like, let's try something with vampires. And obviously, who doesn't love vampires, right? So I was like, yes, please. And so I started kind of, brainstorming ideas. I always knew I wanted it to be based in the world that it was based, because I had just watched The Mask of Zorro. So I always knew, I was like, okay, I want it here, and I want it kind of ridiculous, kind of tropey, just like campy a little bit, just like how The Mask of Zorro did. Like they just went for it, and it was so fun. So I wanted vampires in this world, and so that's kind of where it came from. And originally, he was going to be this older ancient vampire that had been there, and he meets this young beautiful vampire huntress. But then I was talking to one of my friends, and she was like, why does he have to be this ancient being? Why can't he be just some like brand new vampire? And then that like clicked, and that's where the whole storyline came, of this young guy that was just turned, and he's terrible at being a vampire. He hates it. And so so that's kind of where it stemmed from. Was basically, I had to write a book. We came up with vampires, and then luckily I have a community of friends that were like, yes, let's think of stuff. And it just bloomed from there. And I'm so happy that that's what we came with.
That's awesome.
That is. Like I was saying before, I absolutely loved mythology as a kid. I would have definitely been a Percy Jackson person. If those books had come out when I was in elementary or middle school, I would have been all over that. And I was always really fascinated by the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, less because of the inevitable tragedy nature. Like I know a lot of people are talking about that, particularly with the popularity of Hades Town, which could almost be read as like a time loop sort of story. I was more interested in this idea of this man who loved his wife so much that he was willing to go into the darkest place in the universe in order to try to rescue her. And I was also really interested in the musical component to that he is not Heracles, he is not Odysseus. He doesn't go down there with cleverness or incredible godly strength. He goes down there with the only weapon he has, which is his lyre, his music. And that is ultimately what becomes magical, and what convinces Hades to let Eurydice go, is he is moved by a song. And I also really, despite being Jewish, I find Dante's Divine Comedy to be just really fascinating, because Dante, he wrote it when he was in exile, and he just decided to insert all of these people that he hated in hell. I'm like, this is one of the major foundations of Western literature, and it's essentially like a self-insert fanfic. Like, I get to hang out with my favorite poet of all time, and everyone who is mean to me is now being tortured forever. And my childhood crush leads me through heaven. I'm like, Dante, you had some issues, but I respect that. I think we've all kind of wanted to write stories like that, especially when we were younger. So I drew a lot from Dante as well, and his journey.
I love that.
Revenge stories. Yes.
Yep.
Give me all of them. This one's like, anyone that knows me knows that I have a terrible memory. So it's like the ideas don't just like come to me. It's like a snowball effect, like little things here and there. But I was in a creative writing class at UCF, and I had to do a character profile. So my character did come to me kind of like fully formed. I knew that I wanted her to have like the mother-daughter issues, because like that's my MO. The always moving around, the haunted. I wanted it there, mansion in the woods, and her dealing with that. But like that was very like conceptual. I had no idea where to take that. So with A Tall Dark Trouble, I had already paid like homage to my Cuban side, and I wanted to take something from Nicaraguan folklore. And I was looking up stories. My mom had given me some ideas too. And I saw a portrait of La Segua on Pinterest, where one goes to,
Yes.
And she was standing there in the woods, looking all beautiful with her bone horse mask. And I was like, oh, I want you. I looked up her story, and it was just like She's just this seductress creature that lures men into the woods to like petrify them to death. And there really wasn't a reason why. Some stories say it was for revenge because she had been cheated on. But basically, her story was really condensed to a cautionary tale for men not to be cheating jerks and for young girls not to, to stay virginal. So I really wanted to give her more depth and give her character a chance to like shine on its own and give that like kind of vengeful story a reason and make it in the contemporary world.
Love that. Love Pinterest too.
Yes.
It's a must
Yeah.
for world building.
Yeah.
So thank you, artists. Sorry.
No, yeah. Speaking about kind of tackling a story or like an image or whatever, I want to ask about A Cruel Thirst and tackling the vampire. Tackling, that sounds so like like a superhero thing, basically.
Yeah.
But
It's a sequel to Interview with the Vampire.
yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
And sort of how you approached taking this sort of supernatural entity that has so much attached to it, in media and books and film and all of those rules and all of the things that people like think that they know or think they might know about your version of a vampire before they go into A Cruel Thirst.
Yeah, I love this question. Honestly, like that was my favorite part. And even in Sinner's Isle too, like building the lore, the backstory is my favorite part. And so I did definitely want to come into this different and bring on a different sort of vamp because again, their histories are different. They're in different parts of the world, although this is secondary world, but it's like it's not a European inspired vampire. And so I pulled a lot just from like I just started thinking, okay, how would this being come to be? And in my mind, a lot of it would be like, well, the gods, obviously, like they get this supernatural power from something. How would this happen? And so I started just building this story of, we when we pass, we go to the land of the dead, and you're introduced into you pass through these different lands to finally get to El Cielo, so you have to go through all these different things to kind of either remember your life or whatever. And so I built this, like the landing land is basically this forest, and there's a god, and he can transform into a jaguar, and he is there to make sure you're truly dead, like your heart, your spirit, it's gone, you're separated from the land of the living. And so when you enter this land, you're kind of in this, sort of like in between space. And so I started building from there. I thought, okay, well, how would this work? And so the story basically like where vampirism comes from in this world is a loved one is so desperate to have their lover or family member back that they would basically reach down into that world and ask that god to give them back, if he hasn't moved past the land, where they're in that zone. And so that bringing that god, giving that soul back to the body, that's why the body needs to feed on spirit, blood, whatever it is, that life force, because they don't have it themselves anymore. And so, and they take on some of the traits of that god, that jaguar god. So they're fast, they have sharp teeth, all of these different things kind of blended into what that god would be in that land. And he's just a version of that, and slowly starts to lose his own soul and become this like bloodthirsty creature. So I had a lot of fun figuring out this new sort of vampire. And it took me a little bit to get there, but once I was there, I was like, genius, I am so smart.
I also find it super interesting that the first premise of your book, A Cruel Thirst, didn't have the character of the very, like, it didn't, sorry, the premise of your book first had like the very, very old ancient vampire first, and then you went and you created that version of the character. Because like reading it now, it just feels so sort of course this would be. And so I find that really interesting that you actually changed that.
Yeah. No, once we went younger and he was just this poor kid, it changed everything. And yeah, I'm so glad we did, because had he just been this moody, broody, ancient guy, it probably would have not been nearly as fun, because Lalo is, he's just the best. He's so like, he's very anxious, but he's also very uptight. He loves his things being clean. And so yeah, knowing he was this young guy changed everything.
Have you seen
Yeah.
What We Do in the Shadows?
Yes, I was very inspired. I was very inspired. One of my favorite shows ever. So
I love
funny.
it. And the movie is so good. I quote that movie all the time, like, Bob, it's you.
It's so good. Yeah.
I muted myself and then muted myself. Aram, I want to ask you about Death Country, because something you said earlier I found really interesting when you're talking about the character of Orpheus. And what you were saying really clicked with me when you were saying it about how, Orpheus is such a different version of like one of those Greek heroes that you see in a lot of myths and everything. So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about sort of that component, and then just in general, how you sort of developed and built these three different characters there and their backstories before we even see them on the page, specifically also like the queer representation in Death Country. So I'm throwing a lot at you all at once, like all of these different things that I just want to know about.
So I tend to write, I guess, somewhat atypical male heroes anyway. Like I tend to lean into like I guess like the softer kind of end of masculinity. And I really wanted to talk about toxic masculinity, specifically in the Latina community, with this particular book, where I have my main character of Andre starting out as he has a lot of rage issues because of the conflict that's happening between his parents. He has no other outlet for that. He is constantly being caught in the middle of this war between the two of them and having to navigate that. So he initially takes that out on the people around him before a near-death experience and a deal with death causes him to take a different approach to life. He surrenders his shadow side quite literally. And then he's navigating the world in a very different way. And I wanted him to be that parallel to Orpheus. He finds solace in music, and he also ends up finding his magic in his music. Music has always been very important to me, and it was extremely important to me as a teenager. And I know that seems to be a universal thing, regardless of generations, is teens love music. It is so passionate. It expresses so many things that maybe they have yet to learn how to verbalize. And I am a big fan of casual queer representation. And that's really what I sought to do with this book, where it is a book with queer characters and it is a romance with queer characters, but it is not a romance novel, and it is not a novel necessarily about being queer. It's just these three kids are in a polyamorous triad. They connect to one another mostly through art. Renee is a photographer. She's also a witch. And Leora is a dancer and a singer. And then, of course, Andres is the Orpheus figure, where instead of a lyre, because that would be a bit of an odd thing to have, like a Gen Alpha kid have a lyre, he has an electric guitar.
It might work for him. You never know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It could be like, yeah, edgy. I did this before it was cool. Now the lyre will come back.
Yeah. I feel like you say that as you were saying that about like the lyre, I was thinking, but I feel like you could definitely do something where they, like they saw it randomly and then they're obsessed with it. And yeah, then it becomes like the staple of their personality, it like becomes their defining feature. Like they're the lyre player.
Yeah, they're that kid.
Exactly. Right. And then it's like, oh, going leaving for my like every day going to school. Gotta bring my lyre. Like
there goes Andres going to the cafeteria with lyre.
Yeah, like your own seat for it. And it's like, now it's the lyre character.
Yeah.
I want to switch a little bit and also talk about the curses in these vengeful wishes. Because what I loved about, or one of the things I loved about your book, is that you connect curses and the past. Like you have this connection between legacy and sort of the past and the curses specifically. And I was wondering if you could talk about, first of all, like that connection for new readers, obviously, who haven't read the book since it's not out yet, and also why you're drawn to this connection between the past and curses and like what has happened in our own legacy.
Yeah, generational curses, like inherited curses, is very much my jam. Even in my first book, A Tall Dark Trouble, there was a love curse that went through generations of women, witches, and I like the idea of like, because so much of our beliefs, our morality, our trauma is already inherited by like our ancestors and our culture. I like the idea of something being like something outside of our control, something we never really asked for, becomes our burden to deal with. And that's kind of what happens with curses. We never asked for this. It wasn't because of our mistakes, but we still have to deal with it because of who we are, where we come from. And curses are also a common thing in a lot of Caribbean cultures, a lot of Latinx cultures. It's very, I don't know, it's just very common to talk about it. Like my grandma cursed her neighbor for stealing a chicken, or like there's just, it's very common to hear, like at least everyone in my family has a curse story. So it came like kind of naturally, inherently. Actually, when Nina Moreno, author of Don't Date Rosa Santos, became my mentor as I was writing A Tall Dark Trouble, and then I read her book Don't Date Rosa Santos and fell in love. She also had a love curse, and we talked about it. We're like, why is this so like inherent in us? Like, why do we have to have a curse? But yeah, I just like playing with those ideas and thoughts because so much is already inherited.
Yeah, I love with your point about it being out of control. And I think the beautiful thing you've also done in your book is you switch that, or like you talk about how something that you, as you're saying, is out of your control becomes something that once you know about it, you have the power. Like you have the control again to figure out, what am I going to do with it? Like, am I going to just let it keep going on, or like, am I going to do anything about it, basically, or just like continue going to school?
Yeah, like breaking those generational chains, breaking those generational traumas. With anything, like it becomes up to us to see if we want to like perpetuate a cycle or step away from a cycle. And I like the idea of my character, coming out of their shell and like stepping away from what their parents might have done.
I just want to remind everyone watching, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. One of the first questions we got pretty early on in the panel was, when is the anthology with all of you coming?
Yes, let's make it happen.
Yes.
Right. When you're asked this question for that launch, you can reference this specific panel, this specific moment as the inspiration behind it.
Yes, it's happening. It's official.
Yes.
Right now.
Here for it.
I want to also talk about the dynamic in A Cruel Thirst, because it has such a beautiful and such a fulfilling kind of enemies to lovers romantic storyline. And I thought it was really interesting because when I was like going on, thinking about questions and stuff, and I was thinking about Sinner's Isle as well, you explore a similar kind of bantery, tension filled, not sure if we should trust everyone kind of deal. And so I wanted to know specifically, when you created the relationship in A Cruel Thirst, how did you sort of differentiate their kind of relationship from Sinner's Isle and, the characters and their dynamic? Like, how did you pull from maybe what you had experienced with before and also differentiating it?
Yeah, honestly, it truly was the inspiration. A lot of what I did with Sinner's Isle, like, I love Sinner's Isle and I love their dynamic, and it made sense for them in that book. But I was like, oh, I could probably do like the enemies to lovers better. And so I really wanted to try it where it really felt very angsty, and it just felt bigger. And so what better way than a vampire versus a wannabe vampire hunter? And so yeah, I pulled a lot from what I did in Sinner's Isle, but I definitely wanted to dig deeper with The Cruel Thirst. Again, I feel like I just learned so much through that first book on what I could change and try and build upon. And so for A Cruel Thirst, I even just dug deeper into kind of their why and their personalities. And Lalo he's so kind-hearted naturally. He's very, like I said, he's pretty uptight about things. He's just like this bookish golden retriever boy. And so what better way than to give him Carolina, who is pretty much the opposite in so many ways. She's very feisty. She's ready to fight at any second. She's ready to tackle. She's ready. And so yeah, so a lot of their personalities kind of just also butt against each other. Of course, she wants to murder him any chance she gets in the beginning. But then as she kind of gets to dig deeper into, wait, this is actually just kind of a boy, things start shifting and her own mind shifts about what vampires could be. And so, yeah, so with each interaction, I wanted to kind of help them break each other's mindsets a little bit and soften them both in different ways, maybe toughen up Lalo in some ways. And so, with Sinner's Isle, I feel like it was an insta love sort of situation, and it made sense, like I said, for them, but I didn't want that here. I wanted them to work for it. And so towards at the end, they finally got there. But yeah, I definitely had the mindset of like, don't make this easy for them. So yeah, that was the difference.
So it's A Cruel Thirst, subtitle, Tackle a Vampire.
Yes. I'm going to change the title. That's it right now.
Yeah, exactly. Right. The paperback releases will now say Tackle a Vampire.
It just feels right, to be honest.
And how more enemies can you get than like a vampire and a vampire hunter, right? It's just...
Exactly. I made it easy for myself in that one.
East Coast Soul Spike.
Yes. Exactly.
Vanessa, you mentioned before moving around and like how that is part of, I guess, your brand and like one of the things that you really love. And that was also one of the things I really loved about These Vengeful Wishes, this like CC forming roots and deepening connections, exploring kind of thoughts on relationships and friendships different than kind of moving around, like what it would mean to kind of have to stay still for a moment, I guess. So I was wondering if you could talk about that aspect of the character and the past specifically, and what kind of this book and this opportunity would open up.
Like forming roots for the character. Well, I really like the idea of the found family trope. And it's one of my favorites. I always gravitate towards found family and choosing your own family, choosing your own paths, finding a home. I'm very like obsessed with home. And in this one, it's Ceci moves into a haunted manor, but it still feels like home. It's calling to her. It makes her feel wanted and loved. And those are the things that she mostly seeks in life. Because I always want to create characters that are for kids that maybe haven't grown up in the most nurturing homes or in safe spaces, and see that there is a path for them, like that they can carve their own path and find their own home and find their people. And like, this is what they're experiencing now isn't the end all be all for them, that there is a path moving forward and that there is a safe space that they can, that they'll find eventually. And yeah, I just like the idea of exploring new relationships, new connections, and being chosen, making the character feel I'll always be a chosen girl trope girly, or I like the idea of everyone fighting for the main character. Like, I want them to feel special because they deserve it.
Sorry, I just again. I have an unscheduled, I guess, follow-up question about Ceci and her relationship with her mother, because I feel like that is one of the things that is so deeply also connected to the character and the moving around aspect particularly. So could you maybe talk about that as well for like new readers who don't know what I'm talking about, and what it was like to explore their relationship on the page as well?
Yeah, I mean, since I mostly write from female perspectives, I there's usually a very strong connection to the mom in those stories. Like you either look up to them or you don't want to be them, and then there's just like this friction, especially as a teen, because you see them as they're only supposed to be this one thing. They're only supposed to be this role model, and moms are, especially now that I've had kids, I'm like, moms are flawed. Moms have had their own lives. They're still living, they're still making mistakes, they're still learning. And I really like for to show that on the page. Like I like to show that the mom has flaws, that the daughter and her are both working through life like together. Like they're both growing together. It's not too, like just one there and then the daughter moves on. Like they're both moving on together. And I like playing on that dynamic a lot. I like showing both the mom and the daughter learning off each other and growing together. So I usually write about those stories, yeah. And then also from the daughter's perspective, sometimes putting boundaries and like sometimes you're in a home environment that you need to protect your space, and even though it is family, even though it is mothers or fathers, like you need to set your boundaries and focus on you and making sure that you're safe and growing up healthy.
Yeah, I loved it, and there were some of my favorite conversations are actually between the two of them from the book, and like exactly exploring what you're saying.
It's super fun to write.
I want to chat as well about memory and forgetting as themes in Death's Country, especially considering the retelling aspect. And if you could talk about how you approached memory, forgetting, and the past with your characters, also tying it to the source material as well.
There's a lot about forgetting in Greek mythology, especially. There is the river Lethe, which souls are supposed to drink from so that they forget their lives in the living world and they can have a bit more peace in the afterlife. So they're not constantly grieving not only what they lost, but also their own lives, which seems very unfair to the dead. You know, when you're alive, you just have to grieve the dead. When you're dead, you have to grieve even your lost potential. So there's a lot about that in this story, but also the possibility of using it as escapism, that rather than confronting the past, rather than confronting your flaws or the flaws of the people around you, that you could just drink from this river and entirely forget. But in Death's Country, the river has dried up because people just keep drinking from it. They do not want to remember their lives. They don't want to process and they don't want to move on. And that is an undercurrent with even the three living characters who go to the underworld for various reasons, where they don't want to confront the past. They don't want to confront the darker parts of themselves. They don't want to confront the toxic adult forces in their lives that have created a lot of pain for them. This is very much a book about embracing your shadow side and learning how to live with it so that it's not lashing out at other people, it's not harming you, it is an integrated parts of yourself, like what Vanessa's saying. So you can do things like set boundaries with other people and say, you know what, this anger in me is actually telling me something important. This discomfort is telling me something important, because I think that we really, I think, you know, in the West especially, we really downplay the importance of anger. We think of anger as, oh, it's violent and we need to suppress it, versus how do we channel that into something more positive? How do we channel that into, oh, this is a gut feeling that I should listen to, or let me channel that into art? Because you don't want to lash out at the wrong people, but you also want to be able to tell certain people in your life, no, that's not acceptable. I'm not playing this role anymore, because to a certain extent, all three of these characters have been shoved into these roles by other people in their lives. And they're very afraid of stepping out of them or of revealing the past. They all have secrets, and they're in the polyamorous triad, they all really want to show the best parts of themselves to their lovers. They don't want their lovers to see these shadow sides and these difficult parts of themselves. And I think that's really natural, especially when you first start dating someone. You don't want to bring the skeletons out of the closet. You're like, I love this person. I want to spend time with this person. I don't want them to necessarily see all the dark things yet.
Yeah, relatable.
Very
Not me. I'm perfect.
Flawless.
Flawless. No skeletons.
Something you said brought up something that I heard as well from Vanessa earlier, and I want to ask an unscheduled question as well about it. I want to know a little bit. I've been thinking a little bit about fantasy and speculative fiction as lenses to draw comparisons and metaphors to kind of issues that are, universal kind of human issues or problems in our own lives that are not speculative. And Aaron, when you were talking about memory and forgetfulness and the river and like how your characters are struggling with wanting to forget or forgetting when they shouldn't, or vice versa, and having that be sort of a metaphor together for them to cross and to chat about it. I was wondering if all of you and could chat about this idea of sort of speculative fiction being a lens, to reflect, as Vanessa was saying, like your inner monsters and the fears that you have, and the connection to speculative fiction in that way, because I think that's sort of something that draws people to the speculative fiction genre as a whole.
Yeah. I think for me, like, it gives you a safe space to explore these darker issues, your own personal, not me, of course, as I said, I'm perfect, but like your own personal skeletons and the darkness inside of you. I think getting to write in these worlds like gives you that freedom and that separation. Like, this isn't me, this is this world, and this is what's happening there. Let's see how they fix it. So for like with Sinner's Isle, their magic sort of comes from their own souls. And so for Rosalinda, her magic was these shadows, these dark, phantoms. And those are all of like her fears come to life. And I also feel like for A Cruel Thirst, it's this idea of having this perception of what's good and what's bad. But that's not how this world works in so many ways. There's layers, there's backstories, there's histories. And so, I really feel like fantasy is this beautiful way of getting to explore those subjects by putting your characters in these extraordinary situations. And I feel like every single book that I've written, I've learned a new issue that I have in my own life and like a new insecurity or whatever it is. And I get to explore that through these characters for sure.
These really are our therapy books. Like,
yes,
it's a bit cheaper than therapy, but
yes.
I really do feel like with every single book, I'm like just expelling my own demons.
Yes.
But fantasy gives you like a nice aerial view of like very connective human emotions that we can all relate to, or that a lot of us can relate to. I don't know why my mind is going here, but like that's why TikTok videos are so many people have gravitated towards it, because they see how similar we are to one another. And I feel like fantasy allows us to also see that in a way that's safe and that doesn't feel like an attack. Especially with like horror and stuff, like the villains, people also gravitate a lot towards villains because we have this very strict idea of what's, like you said, good and evil, when it's so nuanced. And when we see something in the villain that we're like, hey, he actually, like they actually have a point here. Like, why are they the bad guy again? Or am I bad for thinking this way? And that's very much the theme in these Vengeful Wishes too, because Ceci has to confront La Segua, and La Segua has been stealing men from town, has been making them go missing or killing them. But she's like working off this deep revenge. And Ceci sees a lot of herself in La Segua, especially as she's receiving visions of what La Segua went through. So there's that connection to the villain when you see the shadowy parts of yourself in something else, something physical. Fantasy allows you to do that, which I think is really cool. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to jump. I jumped my square.
Oh, that's okay. It kind of makes sense. Like Angela, Vanessa, me. Clockwise.
Yeah.
So I really agree with what Angela and Vanessa have said. I've always been really obsessed with this idea of the monster as metaphor. I wrote an entire paper on it in grad school about how we went from like fearing the dark forest and the animals inside of it because that was our major threat to fearing, honestly, other people. Like, what if your next door neighbor was actually a serial killer? Or what if your computer decided that it was going to exterminate all of mankind like Skynet, where these are the issues that we're dealing with now, ergo they become the things that we turn into monsters. And like Angela and Vanessa were both saying as well, all that inner darkness that we can kind of separate from ourselves. In Death's Country, Andres literally does this. He cuts out his shadow side, and then he has to confront this part of himself that he really just wanted to jettison eventually. And that is a major part of the book.
That's really cool.
One of the questions we've gotten from the chat was, if you were having a dinner party but could only invite one of your characters, who would it be?
Oh, that's fun. Yeah, that's hard because I like they're obviously you love all your characters. They're all really great. For me, I think there's two. The side characters are always fun, but like there's two. Nena is Carolina's cousin, and she's just kind of this like, very extroverted, just fun-loving person. I think either her or Lalo's younger sister, her name's Fernanda, and she's very similar. So one of those two gals, we're gonna chat it up. Because in a dinner party, I need somebody to just speak for me so I can just sit there and eat. So it'll be one of those two.
I see. Oh, you go ahead.
Oh, you're waiting for me? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Vanessa's taking over the chat.
We're just gonna stare at each other the rest of the time here. Gosh, I love all the side characters. I love Jamie, who's the love interest. He's also a cinnamon roll. But I would invite Ceci, my main character, just because I think she really needs a hug. And I just want to like love attack her and make her feel special and wanted. And even though she's a grump, I would still like squeeze her. Give her some motherly love.
I think I would have to invite one of the side characters from Death's Country that Renee and Andres meet in the underworld, who calls himself Virgil, but he actually has another name. He is a dead Ukrainian boy who believes that tact is just not saying true stuff. So he always speaks the truth, even when sometimes people do not want to hear it. He's also very wise for his age, so I feel like I could learn something from him.
We all need that one blunt friend, for sure.
Exactly. Someone to call us out on our BS.
Very, very true.
And that would be the life of the dinner party, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to know, I would love to sort of end our panel today by asking you all about the story and the meaning behind the titles of all of your books. So if you can maybe explain it, and also, let us know if it was not like always the title. So just tell us like the backstory and sort of what your title means to you.
No, mine originally was a different name. It was originally called All of Us Are Monsters. Because again, I was really tackling like this idea of like what a monster is. But as we sort of kind of switched things and it, became different, my publishers was like, let's change it. Let's give it something that's like a little more, like gives off maybe a little swoony vibes also. And so I had no idea how to do that. I had no idea how to give a good title. Sinner's Isle is just the name of the island So I'm not that creative. So I have a Discord group because I co-host a podcast. And so we have a Discord group with listeners and just friends and writer stuff. So I just went into the Discord and I was like, hey, this is what my book is about. Anybody have ideas? And so we were just like, again, I think I just have to have input. I just need help at all times. I need somebody to help me. And so I just went into the group chat and we were just like bouncing off names, titles, all, and they would slowly just get more and more ridiculous as we were naming them off. But A Cruel Thirst was one of the ones that was like, actually, that's like kind of fire. Like that sounds good. And so I gave my publishers a list of the names that we'd come up with, and that was the one that stuck. And it felt right. Like more and more as I would kind of bring it up, I was like, it really truly makes a lot more sense than whatever I was coming up with. Yeah.
Yeah, titles are so hard. They're like as hard as synopsis. Synopsize. I don't know, whatever you say, multiple synopses. For These Vengeful Wishes, which I still refer to it as Wishwell, which was the original placeholder title that I had, because La Segua haunts a well and she's able to grant wishes with a very sinister consequence. So wish well was a play on those words, like make sure you wish well, but also a wishing well.
That's clever.
I thought so. But my editor and my agent both agreed that it did sound a little more for middle grade. So they came up with These Vengeful Wishes. It's all on them. Like I put a bunch of them. I don't remember any of them anymore. But they decided These Vengeful Wishes, and it was just like that. Like it was like, whoa, this is actually really cool. I liked it.
I am also terrible at titles. For a while, Death's Country was just Underworld book. And then I wrote, there's a line in it about death specifically having a country, because in this book, death is embodied. And in so many myths, death is presented as a ruler. So I was like, okay, well, let's take that. What is a ruler rules over? A ruler rules over a country or a kingdom. So that's where my title came from.
Cool.
Awesome.
Oh, I just saw that I missed a question from the chat. And it says, you're a romance writer, so my mind is always on romance. Can you take your upcoming story and turn it into a romance meet cute?
Let's see. Okay. Big city boy travels to a tiny town in search of, a cure for something, and instead finds a young woman who would rather kill him. So I don't know. I don't know. I don't think I did a good job, actually.
Maybe she's a barista. She throws her coffee in his face for some reason.
And well, her cousin is there, and she hits him with the frying pan. So I don't know. We can just add that in there. I don't know. Maybe I won't be working for Hallmark anytime soon.
Those are the Tangled references, huh?
Yeah.
I think Tangled is just like in every book I ever write. There's just some sort of reference. Yeah.
It's just so valid for like it fits any story. It's so good.
It does.
It's
so I failed. I'm sorry.
This is a hard one. You did good. It's like new girl moves into town. Oh my God, everything. It really is that age-old adage that says like something either dies or like moves into town. I forgot how it goes. But girl moves into town. Oh my God, I can't take off the speculative elements. Like, RM, you go, please.
I'm like the gender reverse of that. Like, new boy moves into town and meets two cute girls at the beach, which is actually part of the story before it descends into the underworld. It is a meet cute that he bonds over and then starts writing songs for.
Ooh.
Mine is also like Black Cat with golden retriever energy. I'll just leave it as that, like the trope of what it would be.
I don't think you have to take out the speculative fiction aspects, though. I feel like we're starting to see more like, Hallmarky, like more speculative fiction sort of romance takes, and like more romance speculative fiction movies and stuff recently. Of course, I can't think of like a single title as I say this, but I just know
They're out
that it's
there.
happening.
Yes, right? Like it's like a cozy fantasy. It's very simple.
Yeah.
There's a book now that I'm reading that it's India Holton, I believe, the ornithologist,
yes.
Field Guide to Love.
Mhm.
And as I was reading it, I was like, I thought it was just like a historical fiction, romance, and I was like, oh, this is so good. But then it's like magical birds appear that can kill you, and I'm like, oh, I was not expecting it, but it was so like perfectly woven in. I was like, okay, cool.
I love that.
Yeah, I read that one, and it's funny because I obviously read a lot of fantasy, but my mom reads like really good, like happily ever after, guaranteed happy at the end. And it's funny because I recommended that book to her after reading it because I like the fantasy, right?
Yeah.
And then she also had that similar experience where she's like, I think there's like magical birds in here.
I didn't get it at first. I was like, what is this bird doing? Like, how are they doing?
Where are these birds coming from?
New species.
My friend was like, the fact that in the first scene that she opens up her parasol and just like flies away didn't clue you in that it was fantasy. I was like, no.
It could happen. You never know. You know,
It was a strong windy day. I don't know.
There you go.
a strong gust. Really, just
Well, I just want to thank everyone for chatting in the chat. And obviously, I want to thank all of the authors for sharing their books. You have a whole bunch of options, honestly, for what you can do with the books today. You can obviously pick up Death's Country today, but you can also pre-order Cruel Thirst and These Vengeful Wishes to have something to look forward to. Hopefully, our panel has kind of made you more excited for these books. I've left all the links to the books in the description box below, so easy to find them. And I would like to thank the authors again, and hope you all have a really great rest of your day.
thank you for
Bye.
having us.
Thank you. This has been great.
It was